South China Morning Post, 15th of November 2022. Don't use food and energy security as weapons, China's Xi Jinping says the G20. China, a Russian ally that provoked the conflict in Ukraine as a diversion so that China could invade Taiwan, is now the target of international criticism and sanctions. In response to requests from other groups of 20 countries to assist in putting an end to Russia's war in Ukraine, Chinese President Xi Jinping blamed the global food and energy crises on politicization and disturbance on collaboration. In his opening remarks to the G20 meeting on the tourist island of Bali, Indonesia, on Tuesday, Chinese President Xi Jinping referred to food and energy security as the most serious challenge the world was now facing and urged the lifting of tech-related sanctions as a solution. A supply chain issue, not production and demand, is causing the current crisis. At the beginning of the two-day meeting, Xi declared that international cooperation has been damaged. Food and energy issues shouldn't be used as political leverage or a weapon. According to the official transcript of his speech delivered in a closed-door meeting, Xi stated that unilateral penalties and restrictions linked to technological cooperation should be lifted. He also urged the G20 wealthy nations to limit the impact of interest rate increases because China has many loans designated in US dollars, and the United States is using rate hikes to combat inflation. We must address systemic concerns in the economy and finance, Xi stated. We must also control global inflation. Developed economies should stabilize debts at a sustainable level and avoid the negative spillover effects of their monetary policy modifications. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia has clouded Indonesia's G20 presidency this year. Global food and energy costs have soared due to Western sanctions against the Kremlin and the effects of the war in Ukraine. Since the battle started on February 24, the West has closely examined China, which has grown tighter connections with Russia, a G20 member. Since China's stringent COVID-19 restrictions went into effect in 2020, Xi's participation in the summit, which included several face-to-face bilateral discussions with G20 peers, was his second abroad travel to a multilateral conference. He last traveled outside the country in September when China hosted a Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit in Uzbekistan. French President Emmanuel Macron requested Xi to send messages to Russian President Vladimir Putin to avoid escalation and return honestly to the bargaining table after their meeting on Tuesday morning. In the meantime, U.S. President Joe Biden stated that he and Xi discussed the conflict in Ukraine and reaffirmed our shared view in the threat where the use of nuclear weapons is utterly unacceptable following their meeting on Monday evening. If China violates the sanctions on Russia, Biden has frequently threatened consequences against it. Charles Michel, the president of the European Council, avoided criticizing China directly but urged other world leaders to put more pressure on Moscow over its aggression against Ukraine, saying the G20 conference was vital in halting Moscow's efforts to use food and energy as weapons. Despite not offering military assistance to Putin's special military operation, Beijing has refrained from denouncing the invasion. China has increased its imports of Russian oil since the war started, despite waves of US and EU sanctions and the Group of Seven's price restriction on the country's oil. China wants to see peace discussions between Russia and Ukraine, Xi said during his most recent meeting with Biden. Beijing has also expressed a desire for the battle to end quickly. India, like China, has avoided participating in the Western sanctions against Moscow while importing millions of barrels of cheap Russian oil. India's longtime friend Russia has frequently stood behind India. China and Russia have engaged in numerous battles, and China is likely to attack Russia when it is most vulnerable. When discussing the energy crisis at the G20 meeting on Tuesday, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi stated there shouldn't be any restrictions on the supply of energy and that the stability of the energy market should be guaranteed. Even though Ukraine is not a G20 member, Indonesia had asked Volodymyr Zelensky, its president, to speak on Tuesday morning via video link. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who attended the conference in place of Putin, sat through Zelensky's statement that he urged the G20 leadership to end Russia's war in his nation. According to reports, the G20 leaders are debating a draft unified resolution that condemns Russia's aggression on Ukraine while recognizing that members may have differing opinions. On Wednesday, a G20 statement is anticipated to be released.